1991, should ask you about this as we're hitting the high points of your career, and there's so many credits, too many to mention all of them, or even near all of them. But the Chuck Woolery Show, this is a show where, if you're an announcer, I mean, to work on a late night show, to work on a show where you're the principal announcer, it's sort of like, it brings this sort of Carson McMahon thing to mind. That's got to be an exciting gig to land. Give us a sense. What was the Chuck Woolery show like? There are some clips on YouTube. I couldn't find a whole show.
Uh-huh.
And what was your role in it?
It was Jake Tauber and Charlie Colarusso who I did the $5 job for, and they called Fred and remembered me and brought me in as announce and warm-up. It was a show that was born in the early 90s, as you stated, when Carson first announced that he was thinking of retiring. Eric Lieber is a gentleman who goes back to Dotto, the old quiz show scandal days, and was a producer of note doing Love Connection with Chuck Woolery at the time. And Eric is my God, some of you spend an hour talking about a character study. But he had the idea that maybe Chuck Woolery could be groomable to host The Tonight Show, to replace Johnny. Somebody has to. And Chuck had actually appeared with Johnny, had a history on that show, maybe. So he convinced whomever, Group W, I think again, although I'm not sure of that, to do the Chuck Woolery Show as if it were a late night talk show, sell it as an afternoon strip, but have a live band and have celebrity guests and have doing shtick like a Tonight Show so that he could be seen in that element and have established himself in that genre. So that's what the show was modeled after. And yeah, I was not on camera as Ed McMahon was, but I was the sidekick. You know, the Chuck Woolery Show, you know, and who's so-and-so. Ladies and gentlemen, here's Chuck. It was even some of that. And the line reading was funny. At the top of the show, it was straight from the heart of Hollywood. And Chuck said, shouldn't it be straight from the heart of Hollywood? Because it's straight from the heart. Yeah, let me try that, Chuck. Come on.
Yeah.
What are you thinking? Hello. So that was question number one. We're off to a flying stop. He and I got along splendidly. We shared the stage doing Price is Right live 15, 20 years later. Great, great man. And what a performer. I mean, he really, people take to him. He's real endearing and charming. So the show was an hour and it lasted 13 weeks. We were on the bubble with the same year that Jenny Jones was on the bubble, and we had slightly higher ratings, they tell me, but we were much more expensive with a live band, and we didn't get the pickup. Eric Lieber was volunteered to speak with the New York general manager to try to save the New York afternoon clearance from going into overnight and then the dominoes falling into the Netherlands. And somebody told me that when Group W set up this idea with the New York general manager, that the New York general manager would have insight to talk to the executive producer of the show to maybe have some input into the production, and that would help keep the show alive. And you know what? Even if we don't do whatever it is he suggests, maybe we'll buy another cycle of 13 weeks on the fact that we're doing something different. And the story I heard is that Eric Lieber made the call, listened to the guy in New York, say what he thought was obviously foolish because nobody could know more than Eric, and apparently told the guy, well, that's one man's opinion, then hung up the phone, and we were on 3 o'clock in the morning the next day.
So even though you were trying to do a late night style show, you wanted to strip it at a time where it would be picked up for clearances earlier in the day.
Well, that was the appeal.
You said afternoon.
We would die at prime time, and we going against Carson. I mean,
Sure.
gravestones are lined up from here through Forest Lawn of people who've gone on the air versus him. So it was an afternoon show, and Eric Lieber was a most colorful person to work for. Many, many producers came through that place within 13 weeks. Many, many segment producers. Charlie Colarusso had a heart attack during that 13 weeks. It was a stressful place. But Jake Tauber gave me a plum that I'll never forget. They were going to do daily promos for the show on the next Chuck Woolery show. And they farmed it out to another large production, which does this. This is, this is their bread and butter. And submitted 5 names to the show as to who the announcer could be and sent tapes of who they were thinking of using. And Jake said, well, why don't you use the show announcer? He said, well, no, it's a specialized field, and you read the video, and it's very timing. I'm sure he's great, but it's a different animal. And in reality, they wanted to cut a deal with the voices they already use, who would do 5 promos for the price of 4. I'm not breaking any news here. This has been disclosed and discussed by greater people than me. And they were afraid that let's not bring in some outside guy because he'll never do that, and that'll cut into our budget, and therefore we'll have no profit on this gig. And Jake said, no, use the guy. If he can't do it, then we'll talk about that. So they had to do it or lose the client. I came in, and when I found out what this crap pays, I was happy to do 5 for 4. Happy. Because each episode had a 30, a 20, a 10, and a 5, where you said 3 words. So that's 4 promos, 1990s money, like $2.50 a promo. And then you had $92.30. I remember that number, $92.30 for each tag. Tomorrow, tonight, today. So by the time you left that hour-and-a-half session, you were far richer than you were from doing the show. The math was unbelievable, even at 5 for 4 or 4 for 3 or 6 for 5 or whatever. I got rich off of that. So thank you, Jake. Thank you, Jake. And it was fun. It was a ball. It was like putting a puzzle together. Can I fit my voice in here? And a guy named Alan Skinner would write, and he could hear your voice. He wrote for different announcers, but he had you in his head. So you could go in and not even preview the video and think about where you're going to speak. Roll it. If we get it, we get it. If we don't, we don't. And he had me in his head. He knew on the next where those intonations were and where my pauses were. He could hear me when he wrote. And it all fit. That was a skill.
That's wonderful. Before we move on from this, although you weren't on camera, we talk about Carson McMahon. Were you kind of bantering, even though you were off camera?
Ever so little.
Okay. Next show we want to mention very briefly because it leads to something very important in your career. And I wasn't aware of this show prior to researching. Why didn't I think of that? It's a Martindale Hillier production, who would later produce Trivial Pursuit, on which you worked. And it's an odd show in that Wink is not hosting it, but at least the tape I found, Wink is doing the announcing.
Right.
And you were, I guess, the audience warm-up on this. Was this before Trivial Pursuit? Do I have that correct?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so.
So
the notes will indicate for sure. I believe it was.
So
Wink Martindale had produced other shows, hosted shows he produced, not hosted shows he produced shows he didn't host, and every permutation. Bill Hillier, wonderful guy. Television goes way back. In fact, he was the nephew of the man who invented television, one of 2, not Farnsworth, but the German who worked for RCA. Those watching will know, and it'll come back to me. Anyway, so he was born into television in its experimental days. And they made a great team, and this idea was they had inventors on, people who invented new things, and they demonstrated, talked about it, and then we brought on one very successful inventor to talk about how he did what he did. So the guy who invented Post-it notes to go in, well, that was to mark hymnals in his Sunday prayer book, with bookmarks that wouldn't fall out, but yet wouldn't rip the page. Intermittent windshield wipers, the guy who invented that, was stalled by General Motors and the controlling Detroit forces for many years, and then ultimately stole the idea, and he sued them successfully. So the guy who invented intermittent wiper, what a concept. So he was on. So that was all kind of interesting stuff. I appeared a couple of times in demonstrations, one of the vastly improved hospital gown. So I wore the old-style hospital gown with my ass hanging out, while someone else wore the new-style hospital gown, sans as. So there I was, with very loud vaudevillian boxer shorts, going for laughs, of course.
So since this is Martindale Hillier, how did you land this particular gig? Do you remember?
Wink and Fred. Wink was representing Fred. Fred was representing Wink at this point, and I was another client, and we had met through Fred. And marriage made in heaven, and he took a liking to me. I certainly knew what I was doing. He told me after watching my first warm-up, he said, I did warm up on a show once in the 50s, 60s. It was the hardest job I ever did. You're really good at that. Thank you. So he always had kind word and a high regard for my work, which was very proud of because Wink had seen them all.
Out of this comes Trivial Pursuit, Boggle, Jumble, Shuffle. This is, on the notes here, 1993-94. This is the first time, as best I can understand it, that you're now finally doing really exactly the thing you envisioned that you would do. You are doing warm-up and announce on a game show. Talk about this game, Trivial Pursuit, and the games that grew out of it.
Wink had licensed the idea. Other people had in the past. Other people did subsequently. It's a tough show, apparently, to translate. But he had a really good format with Peter Berlin and Rob Fiedler as his producers under Hillier Martindale. And they came up with a good pitch for it, and they sold it to Pat Robertson, who had the Family Channel. And they wanted to do something in the afternoon other than pray, I guess. So we did a block of game shows that started with a half hour of interactive Trivial Pursuit, followed by a half hour of Trivial Pursuit Classic. And what made these shows unique was people at home could play. Nowadays, we're all interconnected in any one of 1,000 ways. But then you use the 900 phone number, and Wink would ask you questions over the phone, and you'd press answer 1, 2, 3, or 4, multiple choice, and I would tell them over the phone what they could win. So if you called the phone line for some ungodly $4.98 or something, you got a whole show, because Randy would welcome to Trivial Pursuit Interactive. And here's Wake Martindale. Thank you, Randy. Tell us what we're going to win. Today we're playing for the toaster oven, the blender, the whatever, or today's featured prize, a 2-day vacation and whatever. So all these little things were 2 days. Yeah, you got
a 2-day vacation.
And they're not even concurrent. But that's another story. It's 2 days and no nights, so you have to go home in the middle of the vacation. Anyway, all these things were like computer generated, so I had to record a library of hundreds of 3-second, not 2.5, 3-second Bell and Howell toaster. They all had to be timed. Or today's featured prize, and that would connect with something that had to be a dead number, or it would be cut off by the machine. So there was a whole show when you called, and then Wink would do these play breaks by asking questions. You answered 1, 2, 3, or 4, and during the show, we would announce, I wouldn't, somebody in Virginia Beach would announce who's winning in the interactive games. And of course, there was a stage show going on of 12 people playing for Trivial Pursuit, a variation of it, and those who could answer in the fastest time, like the phone game, now played, those 3 went on to play the classic Trivial Pursuit, which was classic game show. Music, announce, Wink Martindale, big smiles, lots of teeth. And it was classic, and it worked so well by Pat Robertson's expectations, at least, that we did Boggle, another show where you could phone in and play, and Jumble, another show where you could phone in and play, and Shuffle, another game where you could phone in. One of them is based, I think, Jumble, on a newspaper game, which they licensed. The others were pulled out of thin air. And they were great shows, and they were big-time game shows, even though they were done on a conservative budget. And it was a lot of fun. And working for a host who's producing is far better than working for a producer who's producing. I mean, because the guy understands what your needs are, and you're relating to him talent to talent.
You've been out here a long time by then. By the
Out
time
here, you mean?
Yes,
right
in
here?
LA. That's right. But, what were you? How did you feel about finally doing this thing that you had, some version of this thing you'd really dreamed of doing?
In my mind, it was just going to be a matter of time, because I was doing all the elements of it. It all came together with Wink, and I was an iconic host, so that was kind of cool. But it never was like, I'm now doing it. It was just the next logical step that was going to happen at some point. I'd be doing something with Wink. I'd certainly be doing games. So it was, and I had done games on pilots, so that was not new. So it was not a big, life-changing moment. It wasn't a threshold into a whole new world.
Okay, on the back of this, you begin to do a lot of game shows, and you're doing this type of work. Let's just hit the high points and mention a few of these and get your thoughts on some of them, and more or less in order. Wild Animal Games. Here is a game that you're working with a young Ryan Seacrest, who went on to a great career, which he's still in the midst of at this moment. What are your thoughts on Wild Animal Games? How'd you get the gig, and your thoughts on that job?
I remember going in to talk to one of the producers. They wanted to cast me as the voice of animals. That was it. Somebody told them I could do animal voices or impressions of animals. Well, I don't do that. But I went in to take the audition anyway, and the guy said, "Well, we're going to use somebody else on that, but you can announce the show. I see from your resume." Yeah, all right, great. So it was sort of like the fallback position. The show was produced by Woody Fraser, who goes way back to the beginnings of time. Everyone in this business seems at one point or another to have worked for Woody. It was the thrill to announce his name at the Emmy Awards, Daytime Emmy Awards, I should say, Creative Arts Awards, for a lifetime achievement. Everybody in the room knew who he was. Everybody applauded. It was his 80th birthday. This guy was doing Mike Douglas in Philadelphia in the 50s or 60s. So I was part of a legacy production team, so it was kind of fun to be part of that. And working with Ryan Seacrest, he was 19 years old and friggin' amazing. It was like he was born on television. The guy knew how to cheat a camera. Guy knew how to, all the moves that you think you have to go to school for, or how would you do that unless you came out of the womb doing it? I don't know, how do you know that? And he knew all the moves, and he could ad lib, and he actually worked with a chimp. Don't work with kids or animals. He worked with a chimp who's unpredictable and managed to make whatever the chimp did work into what he was doing. It was brilliant, brilliant. I'd never seen anyone of this generation have that ad lib and ability to adapt at age 19. It was magic, magic. We had kids in the audience, so they needed to be wrangled. You do a different act for kids than you do for adults, and sometimes every show actually, we took a group out to our back lot or to a location, the equestrian center, for them to play polo on the backs of donkeys. We did that, They were painting elephants with jello, green and blue and red, and they were in a water slide in the back parking area. And bringing kids out to that was just, I was like a wrangler on the Bonanza, come on back, let's go kids, And it was just messy. It was difficult. And we had slime and all that kid stuff. So I earned that money. And one of the parents said, "Don't chase the kids, because then you're playing their game. You need to remain authoritative." I says, "I need to remain authoritative, but I also need to be their friend because I need them to do stuff for me." So there was, I'm not a parent, so there was a lot to learn there about working with kids.
Another show around this time during which you work with an important game MC is Ray Combs, and the show is Family Challenge. Again, a person of a troubled existence, but a well-remembered name in the game show arena. What are your thoughts on this job? How did you get it, and your thoughts on working with Ray Combs?
Real simple. This was the companion show to Wild Animal Games, the other half hour of the hour, and it was announced by Gene Wood. Gene, Family Feud and 1,000 shows. Gene fell on the slime and finished the day, but found out he had broken or bruised or something his ribs, and he was out of commission. So being on the companion show, I filled in. Ray Combs was the host of that, and I had met Ray when he was doing warm-up on Amen and some other shows, and it was no better warm-up guy for a sitcom. Oh, my God. Brilliant. Great routines, great connection with the audience. Brilliant. Gifted man, troubled man. He'd been in an automobile accident on the Ventura Freeway, was paralyzed for a period of time, perhaps going to die. It was a very serious accident. He pulled through, got full mobility back, but was on painkillers for a great period of time because the pain was immense. He was really racked. And it's such a hard thing when you're on painkillers for a long period of time. He had succumbed to the evil side that medicine can often carry. And he was troubled and out of it, and lost a lot of money at a comedy club back in Ohio, and he'd been fired off of Family Feud to bring Richard Dawson back. They needed something to boost ratings. So, he had gone through some life crises, and it was not a happy day for him. And I felt so bad because I had seen him at his best, and he was brilliant. But working this Family Challenge, he was late to the set. He was all the things that he would never be. And he was troubled and having trouble. I could hear him through the dressing room walls on the phone with people. It was a difficult time. He was wonderful to work with. Every time there was a stop down as an old warm-up guy, he'd come and join me in doing warm-up with the audience. So he was just a pleasure, a joy, but personally very troubled. He'd bring it to stage, but if you looked in his eyes, you could see the sadness. And lo and behold, there's an earthquake in 1994. I move out of my home and move into Oakwood, which is legendary as a place for stranded talent. And lo and behold, Ray Combs is also there because part of his problems were family and marital, so he was living out of the house. And we sat in the jacuzzi. It was a small world. We're sitting in the jacuzzi in the same apartment complex. And then one day he's not in the jacuzzi, and the guard tells me, he had to be taken to a psychiatric ward. What? Well, I'm not going to tell his whole story, but he had attempted suicide. He was put on a 72-hour hold, which is California law, put you in a psych facility. He went to Glendale Adventist in a locked psych facility where closet rods are supposed to have a give way at 35 pounds as a safety measure. He hanged himself in a closet rod in Glendale Adventist, and it was such a loss because this was a brilliant man and a dear man and gifted as far as his ability to make connections with people. What a talent, what a loss, what a sadness, what a dark tunnel depression is, how terrible it can rob people of their whole existence. And we're in a world where a great many people have their bouts or long-term times of depression, and nobody likes to talk about it, but I encourage people to. And I've also had times where I wasn't happy. Was it clinical depression? Perhaps. But if you're having trouble and it's on that level where you're contemplating suicide, my God, let somebody intervene or go intervene on yourself. The loss of these people is phenomenal to me. These were great talents and great people. And having worked with them, I felt a real connection because they were good folk, salt of the earth kind of people. And it's a real loss. So Ray committed suicide. Family challenge was over, and it was an experience to work with him. The show continued with Michael Berger, another great host who I've worked with as host, and it went on. And Wild Animal Games, I don't know if we got 2 seasons out of that or not, whatever. And Woody Frazier, great experience, fun time, interesting stuff. It's all interesting stuff to me. I don't know if anyone is still alive watching this.
Would you like to take a break?
No.
Okay.
Listen, this is a telethon. We're going to cure this disease.
That's right.
We're going to cure this disease before we leave today.
Interestingly enough, we're actually not that far into it chronologically. It does feel like a lot. Of course, you have a lot of material. You were working on warm-ups and various things, sitcoms and all that stuff in this time, but I'm just touching mostly the game show stuff here because you've done so much. 1999 Hollywood Showdown. This, again, working with another man who later worked on the Price is Right live show on which you worked, Todd Newton. He's done a lot of game shows, kind of that more recent generation of game hosts. Your thoughts on Hollywood Showdown and working with Todd Newton?
All-star. It was for Game Show Network, which meant the budget was tight, cable. But my God, it was Bob Stewart's son, Sandy Stewart. Todd Newton, I had seen on E! And he's doing these wild hot tub party things, and that was not him at all. He was a game show aficionado and fan, and he had the gift. He had the look, he had the voice, and he had that gift. I mean, he was like watching a junior Bob Barker, ingratiating, endearing, knowing how to move contestants around, having fun at their folly, but not at their expense, laughing with them at their foibles, but never embarrassing them. I mean, there's a lot to be learned about this game show hosting business, and he had it. And this was his first game show that I'm aware of. And he went on to receive the Best Game Show Emmy 2-3 years ago. We have done over 3,000 performances of The Price is Right Live, the live stage show licensed by Fremantle of The Price is Right. Same show for a live audience, same games and prizes and all that. Thousands of episodes, and I leave here in a week to go back on the road with Todd Newton for the 13th year of me doing dates of The Price is Right Live with Todd. And we've been around the whole country, North America, had some wild experiences. He's a fun guy, another pleasant guy who became a dear friend. But that was not your question. Your question was about Hollywood Showdown, which was a really well-structured show with a half a dozen or so players who were answering riddles. I'm a whatever, who is this and that, and they had to answer the riddle. And once you became king of the hill by answering a riddle properly, you get to call on the other contestants who would read their riddles. If you answered them, you got money. If not, they replaced you as king of the hill. And that was a reworking of something Bob Stewart had done years before called Jackpot that Jeff Edwards had hosted back in New York. Just put a new dress on it and she looks wonderful again because she's always been beautiful. Great format. It was great. We had a great time. Sandy Stewart, couldn't be better. Bob Stewart, his father, who invented game shows pretty much with Mark Goodson, used to come to the set and walk in the control room and even looking at the monitors would say, tighten up on number 2. You're what? I mean, the guy knew all there was to know. He could see camera 2 was loose. Not even looking at the monitors. While he's talking to you, he's watching something out of the corner. Brilliant stuff. Sandy, brilliant man. And Todd Newton, it was just a wonderful time. And we were working on it for Sony Game Show Network on the Wheel of Fortune stage. So they would pack up their stuff and we'd put our set out. And then we'd leave and vice versa. And I used to joke about the union guys, those rough and tumble, set-moving grips and best boys and all those muscle Teamster types who used to come in here and pack up the set. And you've never seen it till these big guys are in here moving their valves. So that's also kept me out of the big time. Coolest thing there was I knew and loved Charlie O'Donnell, who is one of the great announcers of all time, and he worked that stage, and I worked that stage at the same microphone position, so we'd leave each other notes, and that was just wonderful to come in and say, hi, Randy, watch your diphthongs, careful with your diphthongs today, silly stuff like that.
Also contiguous to that show is the all-new Three's a Crowd, which is the first time that I could find that you're coming in to do now a show that has a legacy. You're announcing a show that you might have watched as a much younger person. So what are your thoughts on the all-new Three's a Crowd?
I didn't like it. I love the paycheck, thank you, and I'll be happy to whore myself at any time for anybody. I'm listed in the book.
But only for the highest rates.
That's right. I'm a whore. I'm not a streetwalker. Yeah. It was an old Chuck Barris format that didn't work in the 60s when Chuck Barris did it. It's a husband and wife and the third party, the secretary who may be having an affair, or the ex-boyfriend, girlfriend, or something like that. And they would basically argue and reveal the stuff you don't really want to know about their relationship. It was a TMI show, too much information.
All the Chuck Barris shows were predicated on TMI, weren't they? Not all of them, but many of them.
Yeah, and uncomfortableness and, whatever. Bob Eubank said he had the hardest job, and nobody ever gave him credit for it. He had to go mine these people to get the stories out of them. Where the dating game, he just sat there and said, here, go ask questions. I'll be back in 10 minutes. He had to really work these people. And this was one of those shows. And the host was...
I watched a clip of it this
yeah,
week,
I'm totally blanking on
I didn't
his
make
name.
a note of it.
Yeah.
I guess he
his
wasn't...
son now is a rock and roll star. My God, from Growing Pains. Now you know who I mean.
It wasn't someone I felt the need to note for asking you a question.
Oh, my
That's all I
God, but
can
it's on the tip of
remember.
my tongue, and I feel so bad. And we'll get back to it. And that can kind of show you how much rapport we had. Fine performer, sitcom actor. I just did Celebrity Family Feud last summer, and I'm vamping because I know his name. Tip of my tongue, severely bad. But he also had to mind these players for the embarrassment. And what I had to do as the warm-up was, ooh, ah. While they mined all this stuff, I had to get the audience to react with the, oh, naughty, kind of, oh. It's not fun. It's not organic. People don't do that. People laugh organically. People applaud intuitively, instinctually. But nobody goes, ooh, unless they're coaxed. And I didn't like what they were oohing at, and I didn't like having to make that happen. I did it, and they were great, and it was wonderful, but it was not my favorite thing to do. My favorite thing to do on that show was the opening, because it was a donut. It was like music with vocal, and then there was a break of 40 seconds or whatever before the vocal or whatever started again, and I would have to come in there, so-and-so, and so-and-so, and so-and-so, and so-and-so, and so-and-so, all new, Three's a Crowd, and I would hit that like my old top 40 disc jockey days, and that was just great to get in there and open that tightly produced opening. But it was not my favorite show. But it was the best show I ever had, where I was booked at two places at once, where I'd had conflicts before with producers who didn't want to hear that I was going to another show because their show was most important. This one was both for GSN, and therefore I could be assigned where to go and not be the heavy. And the host of that show, oh, I'm so embarrassed. And now a man who's gentle enough for a woman, strong enough for a man. That was one of the openings. Alan Thicke. Thank you. All I had to do was go back to the opening. Okay, I know that for future if I forget anybody.
Also,
Alan Thicke.
late night host at one time.
Yeah, Thicke of the Night.
Among other things.
Sorry, Alan. Sorry.
2000 to 2002, again, another legacy show that you worked on. You worked on it in the wake of the departure of Johnny Gilbert, great game show announcer, and that Supermarket Sweep. Al Howard, famous name in production. Your thoughts on Supermarket Sweep, on Al Howard, on anything about working this show?
This is a book. Al Howard is a fascinating human being, still with us. He worked in Wall Street. He was Madison Avenue when Madison Avenue was Mad Men. 60s. He even worked way back. There's a Ford in your future when you couldn't buy a Ford during World War II because it was all Army. There's a Ford in your future. So he did all these major ad campaigns, Cokes and Pepsis, and he worked for Rossa Reeves, who was a brilliant name on Madison Avenue for the people who care about the history of advertising. And he knew all those people and all those campaigns and had a story about all of them. And it was fascinating to get him off on that tangent. It was also fascinating to hear what it was like to put a show on in 1965 from an actual supermarket with camera cables that were 4 inches thick and had to be draped over shelving in a real market. You had to get in there the night before and work all night long to equip this place and to run these supermarkets and people tripping over cables. Phenomenal, the production value that went behind Supermarket Sweep in its first iteration for ABC. Talented associates, David Susskind had money in it, but hated game shows so much he didn't even show up to the pitch to ABC, and he showed up to every other pitch his company ever did, so that was kind of funny. But ABC bought it, tested through the roof, big hit for them. Al Howard did the show for many years, then invented Sale of the Century and other shows, got into litigation with Reg Grundy, who was noted for borrowing game formats overseas, and was one of the few people to actually sue and have a settlement with Reg Grundy. And then this came back, Supermarket Sweep, legendary. Who doesn't want to run through a market grabbing food items? And Johnny Gilbert was doing it, and Johnny Gilbert and Al Howard, who is an alpha male, it's his show. He created it. He produced every episode, thousands of them over 50 years. He handcrafted every one of them. He would have you read the narration, and remember, Randy, you want to put a drop of poison in there because you don't know whether she got the Tide detergent or not. When wow. I mean, there was all this thought that went into what you were delivering, nuance in telling this play-by-play of these people running through the market. I had no idea. The guy, every episode was hand-hewn by the master. And he cared a lot, and I cared a lot because it was fascinating to learn all this nuanced stuff and psychology that went into the show. Had a ball with it. Loved him, loved doing that show because it was a challenge. You were reading to video, and the video was already built. So if you were talking about her grabbing gold-wrapped Farmer John hams, that's 1, that's 2, that's 3. She's getting her limit of 5. You had to sync up with this stuff. And when the camera cut to the next scene, you didn't know when that was going to happen. You knew you had this kind of stuff to say, but when they cut, you can't be talking about that. You're over here now. And you don't want to get over here when we're still on the hams. So there was a lot of ad-libbing. While a lot of this was studied, you'd have to go fill time with, boy, look at her hoist those heavy meats. You had all these wacky lines, ad-libs that came out of God knows where. Look at her hoisting these heavy meats. I mean, I don't know where this stuff comes from, but you had to keep the energy and pacing going till the camera caught up with you if you were ahead, and if you were behind, you were slicing copy to catch up. And eventually you'd have to stop because there was just no way to save it and do a pickup. But the thrill, the challenge for the production team and myself was to get through 3 minutes of this without stopping. And we did on many occasions, and that was just a great challenge, like finishing the Sunday Times crossword puzzle.
Now, in talking through these credits, I'll jump back and forth here because some of these credits you have their warm-up. They're not announced, but they're on very, very notable shows like Weakest Link. I mean, I don't think you were ever the announcer on that show.
Nope.
This was a really big, important show, so
Yeah.
I think we should mention it. So let's just jump back and forth, grab a couple of these warm-up credits as we come up to to Price is Right, which is one of your last big announce credits. You were warm-up on 21, the Maury Povich version, which was brought back, but you were not announced.
By this time, there's a reason for it. At this time, announcing was done in post. Shows would tape 10 cameras, each ISO'd, and they'd build the show later. You came away with 10 cameras from a 3-hour session. You got 30 hours. That's to come down to 48 minutes. So it was I don't know, it's like building a Trump Tower. Oh, God, I knew that name would come up. So it was constructed later. So all these announced gigs went in to be functions of post-production, not on the set.
Sure.
So suddenly these are different jobs now. You come in to do warm-up, there's no microphone. And the guy who's doing the announcing, the audience went home days ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yes, so 21 was the revival of the show that was all the scandal. NBC owned it. NBC bought Barry and Enright, Dan Enright, Jack Barry's scandalized formats during the scandal. So they owned Concentration, they owned Tic-Tac-Dough, they owned 21. They pulled 21 out of mothballs. Big budget, prime time extravaganza. Tom Scott and a live orchestra to play think music. It was just phenomenal production, over the top. Freddie Silverman comes out of retirement. I don't know where he was. And huge money, huge personalities, huge talent. What a big budget number. And you know what? The reason it was rigged in the 50s is because the format doesn't work. And guess what we discovered took us, I don't know how many millions to discover, the format doesn't work. So it didn't turn out the way anyone would have hoped, but power to them for pulling this out and going for, the big balls against the wall gamble on a big name show. And it was a treat to work with Maury, old news guy, which meant he knew how to drink. And other guys would not show to the rap parties or the cast staff part. He was hoisting with the best of us and telling great stories. He'd been a news anchor with Wally Bruner at WTOP in Washington, so it's a small world. And his father, of course, was Shirley. That was his first name.
Sure.
Was a sports writer and of note. So he had stories. Connie Chung was on the set, his wife at the time. Wonderful people. Wonderful professionals. It's just a thrill to work with a guy who's just a total pro.
And a beautifully, as you note, I recall watching it, beautifully, very dramatically produced show. Very nice.
Yeah.
2001, 2002, you worked with both Ann Robinson and George Gray, and the show is very well remembered, Weakest Link. You were audience warm-up on this show. Your thoughts on Weakest Link?
Huge, again, NBC threw big money at this, and it worked. Weakest Link, all the Weakest Link, goodbye. I mean, that was everybody's tip of tongue. It had its hula hoop 15 minutes. And they went way out for it, high budget, big Studio One NBC, and Robinson was doing the show overseas, and they didn't want to do it with a Brit because she spoke with an accent. So they were trying to cast somebody here. We did pilots with people, and eventually they did a pilot in England with displaced Americans. So she was the only Brit on a stage in England to show what it would be played like if it was all Americans and only her. And you know what? They did the right thing. They brought her in. Who cares if she speaks with an accent? It's not off-putting. And she's brilliant. This woman was an ad-liver. A lot of stuff was written, but she was played that character, that harsh school mom thing, to the max. She's not that at all. Very cultured, charming, sweet, generous lady. But it was a lot of fun to watch her in that realm of her character. We stopped after each round so she could review the insults. So it was a very tedious taping. Again, multiple cameras, all ISO, lots of retakes because of the complexity of the production. So it was a lot of time. But I had a good time with it. I felt supported. The producer who did many of these shows I didn't mention earlier was Phil Guerin, and he was a dear man to work for. So I felt like I wasn't being judged. I was believed in and had free reign with the audience, and that was great. The nicest thing Ann Robinson ever did, twofold. One, she called me her co-host. She says, you're the host for these people here, and without you doing what you do, I can't do what I'm doing. Well, I don't believe that, but it was so kind of her. She wrote a book. I said, I can't wait to read it. She came in with a book, autographed to me. Other people, it's like, buy the book, And we were taping during September 11th, 2001, World Trade Towers. The world changed overnight. And nobody would fly. Airports were closed, I think, for several days, And it was a matter of a few days after taking down of the World Trade Towers, when the world was, I don't know if you didn't live through it, you just don't understand terror and terrorism and who's the next target. So we were going to suspend production. She's in England. No one in their right mind is going to get on an airplane. Oh, no, I'll be right there. She flew like one of the first flights after 9/11 across the country and to do our show. What a trooper. She didn't have to do that. She was worth millions already. Many. And the audience is filing in, and the stage manager, Bones Vosberg, and I look at each other and say, if it's done with the World Trade Towers, what's next? Disneyland? NBC? A movie lot? There's no security. There's somebody at the guard gate, but nobody's walking through metal detectors. We got metal detectors. We got rent-a-cops. If you wanted to get in there and do something, you could do something. But thank God, at least somebody was looking at these people other than the stage manager and I. So I give her great credit for seeing that through. We did a bunch of episodes, like 40 or some number like that. And I guess the numbers were slipping, and they started to do what every show does when numbers are slipping. They bring in celebrities. So it was wonderful to introduce celebrities to the audience before the show. Ladies and gentlemen, you introduce them, they come out, they say a few words. Wonderful to have touched the flesh of some of these great people, but it kills a television show, I think. It's proven itself to be the truth. So we went away, but the show was still so strong that NBC wanted to run it as a syndicated daytimer. Some of the markets double ran it, meaning 2 half hours back to back. So we had to get busy in a hurry, milling these out. We tried a couple more pilot hosts who could insult, but nobody could do it like George Gray, who would insult. It was not doing Ann's act. He could insult you with a wink in the eye. I don't know how you do that, but he was great. And he was an old warm-up guy. His mother had been a casting director. He'd been in commercials as a kid, but, totally knew the business, fully comfortable in front of a camera, and had done tons of warm-up. So he was a kindred spirit, and we would do shtick together during some of the stop-downs. Wonderful guy. Opened his home every Friday after taping for the cast, crew, hangers-on to come and party at his house. Open bar, bartender, games. Nobody does that.
Another show around that time, in my memory of watching it, it was in some ways inspired by Weakest Link, at least in its staging, and that's Russian Roulette.
Uh-huh.
Your thoughts on Russian Roulette?
Did a day there. Great show. Mark L. Wahlberg, who I also do The Price is Right live with, was the host. And I thought it was the greatest trick in the world. It was answer questions. And it was weird because you were working to an audience that you're looking up at because they need to be 10 feet above the stage floor because the players are 10 feet above the stage floor. And when they answer incorrectly, a trap door opens and they fall down out of sight. They just disappear off the stage. Cameras are at stage level, obviously, and they're gone. They're falling down here. How cool is that? Stage door open, they fall. It was great. There are people and mats down there, and Must have been a hell of a disclaimer, legal statement to sign about injury. Nobody was injured, to my knowledge. But I thought it was a great show, wonderful show, and Mark Wahlberg makes anything sweet. Mark Wahlberg was called in by Fox to host stuff that's unhostable. I mean, some of these, lie detector tests and crazy relationships, Temptation Island. I mean, all this. And he made them work. I don't know how you do that. They were just weird shows. So he was at home with this. It was a snap. And a fun show and great people.
And this is the Mark L. Wahlberg, not the movie actor, but this is the man who is the host of Antiques Roadshow for many, many years. Very well-known credit. Your next credit, you talked about it. You discussed in detail how you got the job on The Price is Right, CBS. If you're a game show announcer, if you're even a broadcaster who isn't involved in this in any form, I mean, or if you're a fan, the concept of a game show announcer in the modern terms is defined by The Price is Right. And that's because there aren't many game shows in the classic sense on the air. So this is what everyone's seen for decades. And when we think of a game show announcer, we think of the Rod Roddy, Johnny Olsen type presentation. And following Rod's illness, you were, I guess, maybe the second person to substitute for
Burton
Rod.
Richardson had done announce work for Goodson. I was box office poison, according to one person. So I had not worked. So they called him first, but they didn't want to hire him as a replacement. So they wanted to open the doors to more people to sample. And Roger Dopkowitz, the producer, came to appreciate me most. He thought my style was good, but I also feel that part of it was that I knew Johnny. And when I did warm-up and went down into the pit off the stage and worked with the people down there, because you have to get in people's face. Up here, you're giving a lecture. Down here, you're doing warm-up. He said to me, nobody's ever been down in that pit since Johnny. Rod worked on stage, and God bless him. He had a great act, great performer, dear friend. But I was taught by Johnny, so I did Johnny. And a lot of the stage people were standing around watching me on my first day, and out of the corner of my eye, 10 people just became 15, and they're staring at me. And I'm like, oh, geez, am I losing this thing? And later on, they said, we were amazed you were channeling Johnny. Well, I learned from him, but channeling Johnny, supreme compliment. And I have everything that Johnny kept over his years, memorabilia, scripts, and old microphones. So I wore his old Price is Right badge to work at the Price is Right at Television City, his Television City badge, which made them all just out of their minds. And I knew a Caleb Nelson, who's now producing a lot of game shows, but at the time he had been an intern there. And he had taken pictures of the place he goes to work. And he had pictures of all the people who work at The Price is Right. And I was a friend of his. And I said, Caleb, you know who all these people I'm going to meet are. Can I look at the pictures and you tell me who the hell they are? So I went in there locked and loaded. Kathy Greco, I've heard Bob joke about you so many times on the air. It's a pleasure to meet you. Who the hell is that? I went through the whole room, everybody's name by face. Blew them away. To me, it wasn't like some way to win a job. I just loved these people and the whole place. That show is the happiest place on earth, or so it seemed. And I fell for that. I was a kid in a candy shop, and I was working it as a viewer, almost. But it was the toughest show in the world, because as Rod told me, and I didn't know it until I stood in his shoes, you're not reading commercial copy, you're reading catalog copy.
Yes.
34-inch wide, dual channel, option package Z with intermittent wooden shield. It's a Spiegel catalog, and it's hard to make that stuff live. I didn't know that till I did it. And I emulated Johnny, and with a twinkling of Rod, because that's what the ears of the audience were used to. And I emulated it to where I think it was my own, but it certainly fit right in with what they were doing. Was I nervous? Only for the fact that it's the show. But it's everything I'd been doing for decades, literally decades. And if I just got past that, it's that show thing, I was fine. Until the first time Bob would look to camera sometimes and go, Rod, who's our next contestant? Well, I didn't know how close to you he's actually standing, because everything's smaller, He says, Randy, who's our next contestant? And I go, for a second I went, that's Bob Barker. He's talking to me. Yeah, of course I didn't do that. But there was a moment there where I couldn't believe what I was doing. And the more I did it, the more I loved it.
You did this. Now, there were people who filled in on Price for even like a week, you know. So you filled in for.
I did half the season.
You filled in for a long time. You were working week to week, I guess. Is that how this worked?
Yes.
Okay.
I can now tell you that the producer of the show, Roger Dobkowitz, liked my style, which I mentioned. He did not like Burton's style. He thought Burton was selling the copy. And he said, how do you tell somebody, I don't know the vernacular of announcing, how do I tell somebody to not push and sell? I said, tell them not to push and not to sell. I mean, your words are right. Be conversational. And Burton couldn't get to the sound that Roger heard in his head. However, the director, Bart Iskander, liked Burton more than he liked me. In fact, I don't even think he liked me at all. So nobody was ever hired because I did a week, and then Burton would do a week because Bart and Roger didn't get along on this. I thought I'd win eventually because Roger was the producer, Bart was the director. So I thought at the end, I'm going to win because I outrank. But no, the director outranks when the host is on camera and you control how he looks.
Yeah.
See, I took the dressing room that Johnny used and Rod used because it was the dressing room. The reason, and Bob said to me, you know, when Rod got this job, we offered him a larger, nicer dressing room, but he wanted to stay in Johnny's dressing room. Isn't that touching? No, Bob, it's not touching. It's because you can hear everything that goes on in your room when you're in this room because there are air vent louvers on both of those doors, and the doors are 4 feet apart. This is the power spot, Bob. Never told him that. Nobody ever went in that room while somebody talked in Bob's room, I mean, to test the idea. So I heard how a director wins curry with a performer who may be sensitive about his age and looking his very best. So I was outranked. Roger was outranked. So what happened was they fought, and Bob ultimately said, enough. If we can't decide on one of these two people, get somebody else. It was King Solomon, and they got somebody else.
So at a certain point, you just weren't invited back for another week, and that was
all. And Roger said, I wanted to hire you. I wish. And he's on the internet and interviews with people asking questions, saying that I was his pick, and he wished he could have made it happen, but it was not to be for reasons other than his desires. So yes, he called me. It wasn't a matter of not being called one week. He called me and apologized profusely for his inability to make it happen.
Wonderful, though, piece of history, and for a person who is involved in your specific aspect of broadcasting to have done that job is the gold standard. And one, as much psychic income, I think, comes from that, in addition to the money. A couple of more credits in game shows, and then I'd like to ask you just about a couple of odds and ends, if I may. You worked Deal or No Deal, again, big show, kind of a game-changing show in certain ways.
And that's the one with all the models with money in their attache cases and Howie Mandel hosting.
Very, very, very produced show.
Yeah.
What are you were warm up on this show from the beginning of the show, I think. What are your thoughts on Deal or No Deal?
I did the very first episodes, and the challenge there was they had learned previously, and now they knew for sure that tourists will not sit for 4 hours. I'm sorry. You lose your audience. So you have to hire an audience. The big dirty secret is people in all these shows' audience sections are paid extras. They're wannabe people advancing themselves in the business, and they're doing this for minimum wage. And it's a tough room to work because they know the applause sign really doesn't say applesauce, and it's not funny. And where are you from? We're all from frickin' Hollywood, schmuck. You know, so they don't go for any of the classic warm-up material, and you have to engage them in things about what's happening in Hollywood now and who got cast in this and that. But their length of interest in that is limited. Now, if you get them to like you, which I could do, they will perform for you. They understand how to smile and applaud. They're performers, and they get it, and they'll give you that when the cameras are rolling. But they know enough to know the cameras are rolling now, and they're not rolling now. So the executive producer of the show came down to me and said, the audience is very quiet. I said, well, they are now. Yeah, I need them be manic. We need all that energy. I said, well, they're giving you energy when the tape is rolling. It's hard for me to get them inspired when they want to sit there and read their book and gossip with the people next to them. I'm finding I'm not being. Would more candy help? No, it's really beyond the candy stage, and I don't really know what I could say to you. And I'd go out there and I'd recap the last act, the long stop downs. Wow, wasn't that amazing? She picked box 8 and it was $40, and wow, now she's down on stage, whatever the thing was. And I'm building it up and you can only do that for a minute and a half. So I saved that until I saw the camera people taking positions, and I'd rev them up, and they revved up and they were great, but I couldn't keep them noisy during stop downs. I didn't know how to do that. I don't know how to do that. I don't think I'll ever know how to do that. And that is why I don't have the job. And I guess whoever got it had these people yelling and screaming, maybe playing games with them, or doing dance contests. But I come from a time when the audience didn't come onto the stage, that was an insurance liability. I was told, you don't bring the audience out of the seats or the audience section. That was not an option. People now have people dancing on the set. But I was not going to do it there, and I'll tell you why. The whole set was made of lucite, and you couldn't see where you were standing unless you were familiar with the stage. How familiar did you need to be to stand on lucite? Listen to this. That was the show with the 24 models. The models would fall off their perches. It's that hard to maintain a sense of
Equilibrium.
Orientation is the word I'm looking for.
Okay.
So they would fall. The models would fall. Now, unless Andy is an audience member up on all this plexiglass that you can see through, and you don't know where you are really in space. You're floating. One of them falls. Now, I'm the idiot. Hurry, put these people on the stage. So I didn't do it because I was told you never do it, and I didn't see it as an option, as something to do. It would be a wise thing to do. So maybe that's how you keep an audience excited. Pump the music at 120 decibels and have them dancing. But that was nothing that was in my bag of tricks or I wanted to add. So I was not kept, and that's fine. There are plenty more jobs. The show eventually went to Connecticut to work. Connecticut had the tax rebates and all that, so they were in Stamford for a while. They certainly weren't going to pay for me to go to Stanford, so it was all good. And I got another job. Isn't that amazing? I was not invited back, and I got yet another job.
And as we said, your list of credits is so great, we can only touch
It's not great, it's just long.
So long, we can only touch that. And by the way, diverse, which is interesting. We're talking about the thing that you're most known for, which is live audience taping and games, but a lot of stuff that's unrelated to that. Next thing we should mention, I think it's the last game credit, and I just want to ask you about a couple of miscellaneous points, is Newlywed Game 2009-2010. And this is, again, it's a legacy game. You're doing it for Game Show Network, I believe. Carney Wilson. Had a good run. Your thoughts on Newlywed Game?
Classic format. Carney was new as a host. She got it, though. She was able to do it. She relied on more cards and prompters than perhaps Bob Eubank, certainly. But it was a fun show. It was an entertaining show. The most entertaining thing would happen before the show when the standards and practices people would explain what languages was appropriate and what language was not. So here came a guy who was a paralegal, 67 years old, retired from the furniture business, who's now working for Sullivan Compliance, and he's involved with coaching the contestants. So this man who's pushing 70 is in front of a bunch of 20-something now. We don't say blowjob. We say go downtown. We don't say fuck. We say make whoopee. That was wonderful to hear this guy go through the entire litany of colorful language. Guy in his 70s. It was just great. I loved him dearly. The show was kind of fun because I didn't have to do warm-up. They wanted someone else to do warm-up. So I sat in an announce booth, having the time of my life, watching the show and coming in on cue. That's right, Carney, And that was kind of new for me, sitting on my fat ass. It was great. It was a fun show to do, mostly because of the people I worked with. And that's always the case. And in this case, it was Joel McGee. Joel had worked for Goodson, and I worked with him on the California Lottery Show, another old game show fan and friend of Fred Wasbrock and other mutuals. As he recommended me, and he used to hang out with me as a producer. He had tons of crap, and he thought it was just great to hide in the announce booth where nobody could find him when he needed some downtime. So we would hang out and crack jokes.
Is this, you say, the California Lottery Show? This is the Big Spin?
The Big Spin, the
And-
biggest money game show on earth, which it was.
And you were announcer? There was no audience, I suppose.
Yes,
Okay,
live
there
audience.
was an
well,
audience, okay.
On a good day, they were live.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so it was just, I mean, there are things like this. It's a televised version of the lotto numbers being drawn?
No, but no, you say. It's a half hour of, once you win the Scratcher games, you get to go on television and play other games. There's a recent show called Monopoly Millionaire, I think it was, that did the same thing. It was games that are not of skill, had to be of chance, because the lottery is a game of chance. And the state commissioners and inspectors and all that were down there. And it was games like, where does the ping pong ball fall? 500, 5,000, 50,000. Spin the big wheel, and where does the wheel stop? So it was all games of chance, but for the spin of the wheel was $3 million. Unbelievable. Overwhelming. And the audience was live, about 150 people, and the people who were on the show were having life-changing events. Some of them were illegal aliens who would win and then face the music. But how do you not go on to win $1 million? I'll face whatever happens. Others didn't speak English. We had two co-hosts. We had Pat Finn and Michael Alejo, who would interpret for the Spanish-speaking players. And it was fun people, fun show. Rob Fiedler, Sharon Lord, Joel McGee. So that lasted for many years. The show was on for 21 years with many iconic hosts, Chuck Woolery and Jeff Edwards. And I had a great time with it. Just a great, fun time. Good people make it fun. You were a dating game. That's all. Yeah, we did that.
Newlywed Game.
Newlywed Game. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I don't think you worked on the
Vinny Rubino, who I worked for at Newlywed Game, and he's now doing the new Pyramid for ABC. And I'll tell you, funny, we did one episode of each season with Bob Eubanks, who came back. And it was amazing because now shows stop and start. Those shows were live to tape. So even when you reposition a camera or have players go up, they would stop tape. And he would say, why are we stopping? Well, we always stop here to write the answers on the card. Well, don't stop. It was very interesting to see the difference in the way a host works today to how it was in the 70s. We just didn't stop. And he said, you're killing my momentum. I'm working with these people. They're civilians. I'm getting their energy up. I'm getting them loose-lipped, and I'm mining gold, and then you call cut. So it was interesting. And we talked quite a bit about, Bob and I, about the changing philosophies of production style. It was really interesting.
And those are the real broadcasters,
Yeah.
the ones who can do it live and have that craftsman-like approach to it. Just asking you about a few names of people that you worked or whom you knew and that we should mention. First, let me go. You have a credit here for WKRP. What is that? I mean, because this is obviously it's not the original WKRP.
No, no, it was the remake. It was,
Okay. The one in the 80s sometime.
80s,
Okay, and
yeah.
we would voice.
And I was a voice, unseen voice, I guess, on the radio. I don't remember the copy, and I really don't remember the recording session, but I have the pay stub, so there you go. I did that on a lot of shows. Not a lot, but certainly more than I ever expected to. Sitcoms, I'm the voice on the television that you don't see. Someone turns on the TV or whatever. And in one of them was the New Munsters, which was a remake of The Munsters. John Shook, Howard, here come to me, and Lee Merriweather. Howard Morris.
Howard Morris, the
Yeah.
famous director and comic and
Yeah.
star
So
of many shows.
if I'm thinking of the right person here, voice on the TV. The Munsters go on a reality show called I forget, and I'm Martin Winkdale. They didn't know I knew Wink, but the character's name is Martin Winkdale. Hi, I'm Martin Winkdale. Welcome to America's Funniest at Home Videos. And I'm smarmy and narrating bits for the show. Howard Morton, not Morris.
Okay, not Howard Morris.
Howard Morton, who did Give Me a Break.
Okay.
Sorry, became a dear friend. Nice guy.
You were, again, just some interesting odds and ends. You did ADR on The Nanny, not like as a voice, but you were an audience warm-up, and you also laughed on The Nanny.
We
What
laughed.
can
There was
you
a
say
troop
about
of
that?
laughers. hired through the agency at an ADR rate, which is very expensive. They could have gotten us cheaper, to stand as a group, like an ADR loop group would do for a movie, and laugh at Fran. The idea was to go in rehearsals and watch the preliminary script be performed live, and to laugh in amplified, because you don't laugh out loud when you're watching something with 6 people, but to give them a gauge of how funny you thought it was, basically. I mean, it's sight gags and jokes, and you give them something to go by, and they would rewrite based on our laughter, come back and see a different show, and when they are pre-taping pieces of the show, and when they're doing the show live to an audience, we're sprinkled about in the audience as opposed to being together, which is what we did when no audience was there, laughing to give her the support and the timing, which is very important for someone doing physical comedy. So we would laugh at rehearsals, we'd laugh at pre-tapes, we'd laugh at run-throughs, and we'd laugh at the show. And that, of course, was infectious with the people around us. But I think the value of it came in everything until the audience came in, the earlier pre-taping of segments, and judging the humor of the show. Did that for 3 seasons or something. It was a windfall and so much fun, and she's a dear lady, and I just got to give you a moment about Fran Drescher. She will tell you this: rape victim, cancer survivor, divorced, stalked, had to move from her home because the National Enquirer printed her address in a picture, and they saw the curb address. So she has had just about everything you could throw at somebody. And she has risen above it all. She's an advocate now for health and early detection of cancer. She's speaking engagements. And this woman survived everything you can survive, and was always brought the right attitude, the professional attitude, to the set. I had no idea of any of this backstory till I read some of it and got to talk with her. And I hadn't seen her in a decade, and I ran into her at one of her speaking gigs recently. She remembered me, which is amazing. And one more thing, she invited us to all the parties. There's the A parties and the B parties, She fed us and clothed us with the swag, the logo jackets. Nobody, she didn't have to do that. We were hangers-on, 3rd-tier employees. No, she included us in everything.
That's lovely. Another sitcom, I don't know what your role was, but it's now a show of legend. That's the Gary Shandling Show. It's Gary Shandling's show, his first show, and Gary passed away not too long ago now. What are your memories of that credit?
I'll talk about all the dead people you want. I'm realizing how many people have left us, some that we haven't pointed out that are going through my mind. I auditioned on the phone. They said they wanted a big award show announcer style. Ladies, and no copy, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just ad-libbing in that big style. Okay, you got the job. Over the phone. So I go down to some recording studio, and Gary's not there, but that great writer of the show, co-producer, who did a lot of Saturday Night Live stuff, was there. What a brilliant mind. What a great writer. So it was Alan Zweibel. Wow, what a mind. So that show, Alan told me, and I've since read, they were always against the deadline. They never had banked enough in advance, and they were constantly doing this thing on the seat of their pants. And when I came in, it was like no other strange day for them. Nothing was adequately written. So they had built the video of me introducing his wedding. He's having a wedding, and it's going to be televised. I mean, it's just part of the craziness of the show. And the big music plays, and searchlights or whatever, it's the opening of the show, and I've got 7 seconds of copy, and there's 20 seconds of nonsense pre-built. So we're writing on the fly, and apparently that's all they ever did on that show. So to fill the time, live from Sherman Oaks, the marriage capital of the world, it's Gary Shandling Show. It's the Gary Shandling Wedding, starring June Lockhart, Billy D. Williams, Tip O'Neill, names out of left field, filling out all these names, and they later put pictures of these people in. And now, your host, Bert Convey. And that was it. It was big, over-the-top announced, huge, big, and I had a ball with it. And I'll tell you, giving that big throat voice with a lot of energy behind it, my voice kind of got weak in a moment, which can happen, you know. So I went, Tiff O'Neill. It was like a Tiff O'Neill kind of thing. Subtler than that, but, you know, Tiff O'Neill. And I kind of giggled after that and went through you never cut unless they tell you to cut. But I kind of figured we've lost this take. But I finished it with a bit of a chuckle on my voice. Can we do that again? Obviously. He says, no, I like it. I said, my voice cracked. He says, I love it. And then I was kind of like, he said, I love it. So I'm on television going, Tiff O'Neill.
How cute.
Yeah, it was very funny. I had a ball.
Speaking of big reads, you also were the voice of a character on the game show Moments Gone Bananas series of specials. And this is Mr. Game Show, Gus Glitz. And I note this because this is your television version recreating a character from the 1980s, which was part of a board game.
It was a toy.
It was a toy. So that's an interesting kind of fun credit. And it's also that big read, that kind of a cliched thing. Did you try to match the sound of the original character or just create your own?
I had heard the character once in Steve Radosh's office because he had it on a shelf. And I knew it was some kind of smarmy thing, but I didn't remember the style of it. So no, I didn't try to match it. I didn't voice the game or the character. Just the character's lips were moving while I read bumpers and intros and tons of copy and prizes for 5 one-hour specials that originally I think was on VH1. Fremantle clips from the closet of old game show outtakes and funny moments. Game show moments gone bananas.
Did on this line of sort of odd credits here, I wanted to ask you about just a couple of these things that are obscure or they're pilots or something. You worked on an unsold pilot for Card Sharks.
Yeah.
We
Card
haven't
Sharks 2000.
Since we haven't seen it, at least I haven't seen it, what could you say about that?
I could say you're lucky you never saw it. Gentleman that you just met, Jeff Merkin, at our last PPP luncheon, was a senior producer.
Who's a member of our board at the moment.
I should have said it with greater reverence. Trying to remember the name of the host. It will come to me, as they always seem to do, way out of timing. The problem with the show is there was no problem with the original format, but it was a time when we all felt that we needed to update things. It has to be updated. We have to update it. It has to be updated. It has to be updated. Well, you don't have to do that much updating, it turns out. We've since learned. Pyramid is back. Feud is back. Match Game is back, and it's all now being done as an ode to the original. But then 2000, we thought we had to update it. So other elements were brought into the show. You could answer a question and get a clip chip that would you could play a video clip of something acted out on the street and predict the outcome, which has nothing to do with the game of cards higher and lower. So there was a convolution of elements in the show. So it was marked for death, in my opinion, from the get-go.
You also worked a pilot of a new version of Match Game that didn't sell.
And I loved it too. It was good. It needed work. Yeah, it was called What the Blank, and it was a great game. Fred Willard was the host. Brilliant. He's an old improv player, and wow, brilliant. So you had 6 players, celebrities, 2 players predicting the answers, but it was so well written for that double entendre joke that wasn't all about boobs and making whoopee. It was actually funnier. That's what made Match Game funny for its time, the 70s. But now that's not as woo anymore. So it really had to be well written to be as funny as it was. And it was. Some of the Seinfeld writers worked on it. But it was almost like 2 shows in one. You had Match Game, and you had some other backstage sitcom-y kind of thing going on, which pick a show.
2 names to ask you about that you've mentioned. We didn't ask about them specifically, but I should because you knew them both. They're important. One is Rod Roddy. You knew him prior to
1970s when he was in radio.
Now, so before you came out here, you knew him.
Yeah.
How did you first meet Rod Roddy?
Through mutual friends, Joey Reynolds and Tom Chauvin. And he had been big in radio in Buffalo, and then he was in New York, and then he came out to LA and starved. I came to visit him in mid 70s maybe. No, early 70s. I was right the first time. And he was starving. He'd come out here to do voiceover. We had a mutual friend in New York, Rick Barbario, who broke the voiceover world wide open in New York, booking gigs with a very soft delivery. Before then, there was lots of, big selling. And he was one of the first guys to do a really intimate read. Really. And that started to catch on. So Rick said, you can't do it in New York. You'll be stealing work from me, but go to L.A. And Rod went to L.A. and tried to do that and did Alpo and did, national spots. But for the most part, it wasn't happening. He hadn't been established yet. He was with Don Pitts, that great voice agent, and at that time, Soap was being produced, and Casey Kasem did the pilot. This is the story of two sisters, Jessica Tate and Mary Campbell. These are the Tates, and these are the Campbells, and this is Soap. And he did that pilot ready to go, and the week before they came out, Newsweek magazine had a front page story, they say, or certainly a prominent story, about this new sitcom that had a full-time gay character, and it's full of people sleeping with each other who aren't married. It was quite breaking for the time, and Casey had a lot of morality about all sorts of things, and he withdrew last minute, and Don Pitts, who was his agent, said, I got to get somebody else in 5 minutes. Who can I get for this? And called Rod, and can you do Casey Kasem? Hi, this is Rod. This is the story of two sisters, Jessica Tate and Mary Campbell. These are the Tates. So he had the sing-song with a slightly different voice, a reasonable approximation of both of them, and they're similar, but they're different. He got that gig. Well, now suddenly he's in show business, and rightfully so. Big break, started doing game shows, had done some for CBS, including Press Your Luck. Johnny Olsen passed away in '85. They auditioned people, they looked for people, they searched for people, and Barbara Hunter was an executive up in the offices, and she said, I got a tape here of one of our shows where the announcer sounds like he'd be right for you guys. Well, yeah, we were looking at everybody, and they played Rod doing Press Your Luck. He's in an upper register. This is Press Your Luck, Rod Roddy. And that's, Johnny was an upper register, not the same style, but so they offered him the job, and he said no. Read my book to find out what happened next. He asked for more money, got a sweetheart deal because they couldn't find anyone else that could really fill the job. So he got one of the real great sweetheart deals, and he lasted so many years that thing became a moneymaker for him. And I knew Johnny. He passed away. I knew Rod. He took sick and passed away, and I was one of the people to follow that lineage, which was an honor and a thrill and the highlight of a career. And they hired me for the Price is Right live stage show off of that, and that's been 13 years and counting. And I'll be up in Washington State this time next week.
Let's adjust this one more time just to make sure we're good. I'll ask you one more name, and that name also relates to this topic, and that's Mark Goodson. You've talked about him a few times. You've written about him in your book. When did you first, because he's a name of legend by the time you come along, when did you first meet Mark Goodson?
I met him when I was doing the run-through contestant thing, which I came out here at 79, so that was 81, 2, 3, around then. And as a run-through contestant, you'd be in the offices. You'd be hanging out, and Mark would come in, Mr. Goodson, would come in to watch the run-through of the show so he could see what the latest changes were and have a comment and an edit thing, and whatever. And I don't know under what pretense I ended up in his office. He wanted to talk to me, and we were talking and walking, and the walk ended in his office. And he said, hey, I said, my, that's a beautiful, isn't that a Picasso copy? He said, no, it's a Picasso. And that's a Picasso too. What an interesting desk. It belonged to Napoleon Bonaparte. The guy had a Rolls Royce in LA with the license plate MG West. He had a Rolls Royce in New York, MG East. Lived in Sutton Place in New York, lived at the Beverly Hilton in the bungalows where Howard Hughes lived when he was here. Used to FedEx his shirts back to New York because he liked the way they did them. Unbelievable opulence. Fascinating character. He grew up poor with a father who couldn't keep a job and put himself through school, college, Berkeley. He went with Ralph Edwards, same time. And Ralph helped him get established, and he was an announcer, and he had mic fright, so he couldn't announce anymore. He was a writer, he was a producer, he worked his way up, and he and Bill Todman built an empire, and the biggest and the best, and he ran a studio in the sense that Louis B. Mayer ran a studio. If you worked for him, you had a job, you were on staff. Even if a show was not producing now, you took a cut and pay, but you were there. You were in the family. You were a contract player. And he kept many very wise people, creative people, for a long period of time because he knew that given a blank piece of paper, the story goes, he could not create a show. But there was no greater editor of a show or anticipator of potential problems. So every show he put out could be put on its legs, and no situation could ever arise that wasn't covered for in the pre-planning. And by the time it left, he could get shows on the air at the networks because of his track record and ability and proven commodity. So he ran the game show world as far as producers go. Fascinating guy, came up through some of the stuff that I shared with you, had a deep psychological profile. I mean, he shared on Sports Illustrated magazine of all places that, he felt like an outsider and he felt like a social climber. He felt like he wasn't ever accepted by the glitterati of New York, which is why he hung out with the glitterati of New York, Moss Hart and, Kitty Carlisle and all these people, because he wanted to be one of them, and he was one of them, but he never felt it, so he bought another Picasso. And fascinating man. And yeah, I learned so much watching him just watch a show. Watching him watch was an education. Fascinating man to meet. And what a studio. Everything ran beautifully, well-oiled machine. And the greatest story about his studio players was Bob Stewart, who created Price is Right, created To Tell the Truth, created Pyramid, created one more for him.
Did he do Password?
Password, thank you very much. The first show that married celebrities and contestants on an equal footing. A celebrity could make a fool of themselves. Mark Goodson said, you can't bring three people in who could all claim to be one guy and not fall under pressure. They staged it over and over again. He brought in his best people, and you're on the air. He thought that could never work. Stuff like that. So when Bob Stewart wanted to leave and do Pyramid on his own, and Mark Goodson said, Pyramid doesn't work, I don't like it, I don't like this, it's a great show, Mark. He went out on his own, and Mark couldn't believe he was losing the guy that created these landmark shows that he had made Mark Goodson, Bill Todman, a powerhouse. And he couldn't believe anyone would want to leave. He gave him another raise, more money. What do you want? I want to go out on my own. But Bob, here's the quote, but Bob, I've made you a prince. Yes, but Mark, but I want to be a king. Got that from Bob and from Mark. That's actually what was said at Bob Bowden's wedding. And that was Bob Stewart stepping out on his own. And that's Mark Goodson. And character studies. Do I love the business? Do I love the people? Obviously.
Last question. One of the things that's so interesting about you is, we've only touched the high points, but my goodness, so many commercials, industrials, infomercials, radio, television of various types, both on mic and camera and just as a warm-up guy. You've also done, and I had no idea about this, quite a bit of stage work. In addition to The Price is Right Live, which is you've discussed, and you're doing that again coming up as the announcer, you have done actual musical theater work as an actor and singer. You sang for us a little bit in this interview. That's completely unrelated, at least it's not formally related, to anything else that most broadcasters do.
Right.
So, and you haven't talked about having any background in that.
All I have is balls to get up on stage and make believe I know what I'm doing.
So where did all that come from, and when did you first get involved in doing singing and dancing and all that stuff?
College productions, and we actually played some real houses when I was in college. But most of it actually came to me by Joe Giamalva, who was a gentleman of short stature, who was a dancer, and his short stature worked for him because he was the stand-in for the children at different ages, different children as time went on The Nanny. And as that small troupe of voice people that hung around, I would clown and sing, and he said, I'm directing a production of The Mikado that's going to be a national tour, and I think you'd play the poobah very well. And I said, no, yeah, I don't do that. He said, well, you're singing, and your style is very poobah, grandiose. You could do that. I said, no, I don't sing. I did some college, but I don't sing. Come audition for the guy. Okay, I'll come sing. The guy plays pieces. What do you sing? Do you have sheet music? I said, I don't have sheet music. People who do this for a living have sheet music. They know what key they're singing in. I don't know what key I sing in. I don't know anything. So I said, I'll sing Left My Heart in San Francisco. The guy gives me an odd look. Okay, because that's not what you sing to audition. I don't know that. Yeah. The loveliness of Paris seems some sad. I left my heart. I sing lounge. And he says, you know how to sing. You can carry a tune. But this is lounge. We're doing an operetta. Hello. You're doing Bill Murray, and I'm doing Shakespeare.
Well, that's the style of the classic pop singers is what you're doing, really.
Yeah.
We could denigrate it and call it lounge, but it's classic pop style, yeah.
Can you do that? I said, no. And I told Joe I don't know how to do that. Those people are going, I'm making a stew. He said, do that. Sing I Left My Heart in San Francisco doing that. I left my heart in San Francisco. He said, do that. I said, but the people who do that are doing something that they know what they're doing. I'm making fun of them. I'm not making fun of them. I'm imitating them. Nobody will know. So I did the Mikado operetta. I am so proud if I allowed my family pride to be my guide. I'd volunteer to quit this sphere instead of you in a minute or two. But family pride must be denied, etc. And people applauded. And we went to the next town, and people applauded. And I got paid, and I fell in love with another side of show business.
You actually played the lead in The Music Man?
Yeah.
That's really impressive. I mean, that's a big show and it's a lot to handle.
Well, you got trouble, my friend. Well, sure, I'm a billiard player. Certainly mighty proud to say. I'm always mighty proud to say it. I consider the hours I spend with a cue in my hand are golden. Help me cultivate horse sense with a cool head and a keen eye. You ever take and try to find an ironclad lead for yourself from a 3-rail billiard shot? Well, just as I say, take brains, judgments, maturity to score in a balk line game, I say any boob can take and shove a ball in her pocket. And I call that sloth. The first big step on the road to the depths of degradé. I say first, medicinal wine from a teaspoon, then beer from a bottle. And the next thing you know, your son is playing for money in a pinchback suit, listening to some big out-of-town Jasper, here to tell about horse race gambling. Not a wholesome trotting race, no, but a race where they sit down right on the horse. Like to see some stuck-up jockey boy sitting on Dan Patch. Make your blood boil, well, I should say. Well, friends, let me tell you what I mean, etc.
Did you do this on tour locally? Where did you do that? Because that's such a wonderful credit.
It's a very small tour.
Okay.
About this big.
Great history, Randy. Thank you for sharing all of this. In wrapping, I will ask you were a longtime member of PPB. You have recently, after having a hiatus, rejoined the group, probably because you were working out of town and some of these other things that we're talking about. And it's so wonderful to have you in the group as a second time. Who was your original sponsor? And what are your general thoughts on the Pioneer Broadcasters?
Love it. Herm Saunders was a producer on F Troop. He goes back to Dragnet with Jack Webb. He produced all that Adam 12, and he was a big PPP person, and we met in the 90s. He said, you should be, 95, he said, you should be part of this group because I love the business. And Ray Angona was technical director at The Price is Right and Match Game, and I knew him through game show circles, and I would watch them tape because I was fascinated by Ready 2, Take 2. And he brought the PPB organization so much material, hardware, sound effects equipment from CBS. Tons of great stuff that I frankly don't know where it is right now, but I'm sure it's being protected after the problem in the bank building. But I came in on those two, Wings and Prayers, and fell in love with Nostalgia Night Thursdays once a month. Great memories of great times in that clubhouse that we had, and always loved PPB. Had a great time every time I saw the folks who were there, and some of them idols, some of them coworkers, some of them friends, and some became friends. And yes, I went out of town and came back and have been here a while, but didn't jump back in until I think you started talking about it, and you're on the board now, and I started to fall in love all over again.
Well, that's wonderful. In closing, is that you have such a love of the craft, a history and commitment to the craft. To talk with you is to talk with someone who loves the history, knows it intimately, and who has had an important part in it. Is there anything you would like to tell me about which I have not already asked you?
I can't imagine. Can't imagine. Although if you wanted me to, I could do 4 more hours. But no, your love of the business is evident as well. Your knowledge of the history. I emailed you this morning with a reference to Lamont Cranston, which I knew you would pick up on and did without breaking a sweat. And, so you have that same passion too. And, I could talk all day about it, as can you, and I think we did actually, now that it's dark out. But I love PPB, and I love the business, and I don't know what I'd do if I hadn't found the business. My life would certainly not have had the meaning. And as Bob Barker once told me, he has the ultimate sadness in his heart for the people who have to get up every day, they go to some place they don't want to go, to do something they don't want to do, for the thrill of coming home and opening a can of beer. Yeah. I added, punch the clock, come home, punch your wife, because I thought it was funny. It's not anymore. And I can't tell you what my life would have been if I didn't have a chance to do what was in my heart. And I'll do it till nobody wants to have me do it anymore.
Randy West, thank you so much for taking this time to chat with us.
Thank you very much.